This week on the Nittany Dispatch, we discuss Penn State's ranking in the first college football playoff rankings of 2024 and the upcoming whiteout game against Washington. This week on the Nittany Dispatch. Hello and welcome to the Nittany Dispatch. I'm John Sauber, Penn State beat writer of the Center Daily Times. She's Audrey Snyder of The Athletic, doing the same, covering Penn State. And we finally know where Penn State stands, Audrey, in those college football playoff rankings. I think so. And I think, and we'll get into this, but I think we can come to some pretty definitive conclusions about where Penn State is right now, too. Before we do that, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Those 5-star ratings and reviews help us on Apple Podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button down below. Hit the subscribe button. That really helps us out as we march toward 2,000 subscribers. But yeah, I think, Penn State comes in at number 6 in the rankings. They are the number 7 seed in the initial bracket, which doesn't really matter right now.
John, can I just say something really quickly about this whole reveal? They made it way more confusing than it has to be. I'm sitting there Tuesday night watching this, and this is someone who has spent a lot of time on, here's how it's going to work, blah, 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 blah. Read all their press releases saying there's not going to be a bracket, all this stuff. And then it's like, yes, Penn State's ranked 6th. They're the 7th seed. I'm like, I get it, but just give us all the teams, then fill the bracket in. And discussion, it drove me nuts. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I get it, but no, I can imagine it did. But I think the one of the main things is figuring out where the committee views Penn State compared to other teams, right? Like their standing in college football, essentially, right? And it's very clear that Penn State is viewed as one of these clear-cut second tier teams, right? Like one of the better one-loss teams. The biggest conclusion that I came to outside of or after these rankings were released, and I think we thought this anyways, but although I do think there was some consternation among fans that this wouldn't be the case. If Penn State wins out, they're going to make the college football playoff. Like there is no doubt in my mind at this point. There is nothing that can happen that can change that. And I think any fans who were maybe nervous about, one loss, like the resume is not impressive. The committee does not care. They're clearly very impressed with what Penn State has done to this point, and they'll have a chance to add a good win against Minnesota and a decent win against Washington the rest of the way.
Yeah, the question that I had for Ward Manuel, and I asked it on the teleconference Tuesday night, was basically, what have you seen from Penn State to justify them being 6? Obviously, you got Tennessee there at 7, which is 7-1. And then, John, did you check out the BYU ranking? You think they got some anger? Yeah. And then Indiana behind them as well, right? Like Indiana's getting no love, which strength of schedule isn't in their favor. But the thing that I found interesting, and I have a full story up on The Athletic, which is, I promise it is worth your time. It outlines Penn State's playoff odds, best case scenario, worst case scenario, players who I think could maybe spoil this playoff bid, all the kind of numbers behind it, rooting interests. I'll spoil this part and say Penn State fans are going to want to root for Michigan down the stretch. That's your path to the Big Ten title game, right? You need Indiana to lose twice. They only have 3 games left.
I have a take about that.
Okay. You also have Ohio State, Michigan, obviously last game of the year. John, are you ready? Are you going to mention something about Oregon? Is that where you're going to go with this?
No, I think Penn State's better off not making the Big Ten title game.
That's fair.
The committee said, I don't know if you were on the webinar they had, I think it was last week, talking about conference title games and performance in those conference title games will be taken into account in those final rankings. They didn't say it would be held against teams, but if a team gets blown out, I imagine that will harm their ranking. And so I think the best thing Penn State can do is finish 11-1 and be either probably the number 5 or 6 seed. I would guess if Penn State wins out that they are the actual number 6 seed, right? Like that the BYU potentially jumps them. You have the 4 conference champions 1 through 4. You have Ohio State as number 5, and then Penn State at number 6. That is my most likely scenario right now, is that being the case, and I think that's a really good spot to be in. I would not want to mess with a conference title game where if you go and play Oregon, because that's who they would end up playing if everything breaks right for Penn State.
The Mighty Ducks.
Right, and then you drop down to 9, and suddenly you're not playing a home game in the first round of the playoffs.
No,
Now,
and
of course, they can win that game and be the 1 seed too.
right,
But
and you get the bye and all that. But
yeah, there's just a lot of risk, I think. Listen, I think we probably agree that Penn State is pretty clearly a notch below Ohio State and Oregon this year right now, based on the performance this past weekend.
absolutely.
So I think going undefeated and just getting that home game is more important. Getting that playoff win and giving yourself a chance against the 3 seed in the postseason. Because by the way, that 3 seed, if they're the 6 seed, so let's lay this out. If they're the 6 seed, they play the 11 seed, right? That should be an advantageous matchup. I think right now it would be Alabama. Listen, this isn't
Wow,
an
John, that's
old
going to
school
make
Alabama
everybody
team.
feel better.
No, I know, but like it's also
Yeah,
probably not going to be Alabama by the end of the season.
Right.
And so let's say you get the win at home in Beaver Stadium in December, on December 20th or 21st over that 11 seed. You're then facing the 3 seed, which is either the ACC champ or the Big 12 champ. So it's probably Miami or SMU if it's the ACC. And at this point, it looks like it'll be BYU, although the Big 12 is a complete mess. If BYU loses a game or lose the conference title game, it could get even messier. So I think there is a golden opportunity for Penn State to just be the 6 seed and make the semifinals, right? Like, I think doing that is very much on the table, and then you're facing, a 2 seed SEC team or Oregon or whatever in the semis, but you are getting to the semifinals. And I think the cleanest path, if we're looking at that 5 to 8 part of the bracket for Penn State,
which is the hosting 5 to 8, you're hosting a playoff game. Yep.
I think you want to be 5, obvious, Captain Obvious here, but I think 5 or 6 is substantially better than 7 or 8 based on the level of the conference champion you'd be taking on in the second round.
And the way it aligns this week, which again means pretty much nothing in the
Not pretty much. It means absolutely nothing.
You'd get a Penn State Notre Dame matchup, which would be pretty wild, right?
Be a lot of fun.
Talk about helmet games. That would certainly be a big one, right? Beaver Stadium just set the attendance record, 111,030. They would surpass it, right? I'd also wanted to mention, a couple things. You mentioned December 20th or 21st. I am intrigued internally among the committee and all these things when the schedule comes out. How many teams, or do they even have a chance to lobby behind the scenes and say, hey, we want to play on Saturday and not Friday, right? Because 20th is a Friday. I'm curious how they kind of slot that. And the other piece to that is there was misinformation floating around Wednesday about Penn State potentially not being able to host because of hotels. That is totally false. Penn State, if it is in a position, again, if it's 5 through 8 and it's hosting a playoff game, everything is fine for them to host a game here, right? The stadium prep that needed to be done, which was part of the first phase of the master plan. Gosh, I can't even remember.
Renovation.
That was all done last year. That's right, the renovation. That was all done last year, so they could be in position to host. Yes. Does this town have issues with traffic and with hotels? Yes, but it doesn't. It has no impact, no bearing on the playoff.
It has that every game day.
Yes, it's bad every game day, right? Like, it took me an hour to get to work last Saturday. That was for a noon kick. So, yeah, there's no bearing on that whatsoever. So I just wanted to get that out there. But yeah, this is kind of going to be, I think, our Tuesday nights from here on out, John. We're going to be getting the weekly rankings. And again, it matters how Penn State lost to Ohio State. Going back to Ward Manuel's comment to me, to my question of why are they 6th? He said, well, it was a close game. It could have gone either way, right? At the end of the day, as much of a gut punch as that game was for Penn State fans, it's a good loss, right? As bad as that says, yeah, right? Like, it's a good loss. You didn't get blown out. They also highlighted Tyler Warren as somebody who's kind of, helped Penn State and their chances with all of his different skills and abilities on the offense, which, again, you could say, well, around the goal line, which, John, maybe that's our perfect segue. Well, anything else to unpack? Okay, go ahead.
Well, there's a couple things, broader things that based on placement that I wanted to point out. One, I think people might be concerned that Indiana will jump Penn State. If that happens, Ohio State's going to fall behind Penn State. Like, this is set up in a way essentially where if Indiana beats Ohio State has 2 losses. Mm-hmm. Like, I think they would have to fall behind Penn State, and a bunch of other teams probably be closer to 9 or 10. If Ohio State wins that game, then you're looking at, okay, Indiana and Penn State have the same record, the same loss. They just keep Penn State ahead of Indiana. Like, I don't know that the committee's correct for this, but I think it is set up essentially so Penn State stays ahead of one of those two teams no matter what, and is behind one of them essentially no matter what, unless they drop another game somewhere else. The other thing, people have been frustrated about the BYU ranking, and I kind of agree with that. However, it is absolutely setting up, and I don't know that they're thinking too deep about this now, but it is absolutely set up for the Big 12 to only get one team and get one team maximum, right? Because now if BYU loses, they won't be in that top 12, right? So they can drop them down. You don't have to worry about a second Big 12 team getting in. If they win, whatever, like they're the conference champ. Someone's got to be the 4 seed anyways.
If you win,
Like
whatever.
Right, but I think that's
we'll
how
put
this
that
is
on their
set up
banner
now. Like essentially where you're getting one Big 12 team in no matter what. It's kind of set up so you can maybe get 2 ACC teams in because Miami's so high, and if SMU ends up winning the ACC title. But I think at most from the Big 12 and the ACC, you're looking at 3 teams, and probably only 3 teams getting in from those 2 conferences. And they put Boise State at 12. Boise State would probably be in the field no matter what and be the 5th conference champion if they win it. So they're in position to essentially bump Boise State out if another conference, so they're the team that gets bumped out of the top 12 if another conference champ overtakes them, or if they lose the Mountain West title game. They have essentially set this up to have 9 SEC Big 10 teams, right? This is it would have to be 8. Sorry, but 8 SEC Big 10 teams, and I think that's where this has been trending for a while. That the gap in the conferences, it's growing and growing even more. But I think these first rankings are a good indication of that, right? They're not going to tell us much about where specifically teams are at the end of the year. It gives you a good barometer of how the committee views teams at this moment in time. That can change, though. What I think it does do is show how the conferences are viewed. They're not comparing conferences, to be clear. They're not looking at this team's in the Big 10, this team's in the SEC. They're comparing how they've played, eye test, all of the resume stuff. But inherently, when you're playing better teams over and over again, you're going to look better when you win those games. And so I think we're seeing the stratification of those conferences get even, that gap is getting even wider at this point. And so I think that is an important takeaway, that it is set up, and I've said this from the beginning, that there would be 8 teams from those 2 conferences that get into the playoff. And I think we are in a prime position to have that be the case.
I also think that when you look at this and you look at kind of I've seen the fan concerns about if Penn State loses 1 game, right, which is where they're at now, what happens if they lose 2 games? To me, if they lose 2, depending on that second loss, I still think they're in. I think now I say that, but if you lose to Purdue, then we're probably having a different conversation.
Yeah, if that preseason prediction I made is right, which it won't be, by the way.
I wasn't going to hold you to that, John, but here we are.
I deserve it.
I mean, I think it was interesting just to kind of hear the justification and look at it. But also, I mean, talking to Penn State's players Wednesday on Zoom at practice, they're all like, yeah, we don't care. We saw it. We moved on, which I think this might be our perfect segue, John. Flushing, Ohio State.
Yes.
1 loss, can't snowball into 2. That's been the theme around here this week. That's been, hey, after the game Saturday, all the guys we talked to said they were told, sit with your emotions, feel this, but we got to move on. And they came in Sunday, made the corrections, moved on. We spoke with James Franklin Monday. I thought it was one of his best press conferences in his whole time here, my whole time here, in that he answered every single question head on, and every single question was about the previous game, right? Nobody was there to say, hey, what about this about Washington, or what about that? I mean, we got into the goal line sequence and the fact that, yes, I think what James said was really telling. He said, you know what, hindsight, sometimes you have to think players, not plays. And he said, at the end of the day, and I'm paraphrasing here, but at the end of the day, when you need a yard, doesn't really matter what the play call is. You got to be able to get a yard. And I think he owned all of it. He understood it. He understood the anger, the frustration from the fan base. He was even asked about the moment with the fan at the end of the game, and which I think is an interesting window into fan behavior, right? And what's okay, what's not okay, what oversteps a line, how much of that matters, how much of it doesn't. And that's not a discourse that I'm going to have, right? I'm not going to tell people how to be a fan or how to feel about it. But I thought it was interesting that he discussed it, he owned it, and he was like, "Yeah, like I mean, again, his response to the fan was, "What's your name?" Right? It wasn't like he said something crazy back at him.
I
So
think
I
what
just thought he hit on everything.
I thought he handled that well, right? Like he wasn't antagonizing
Mhm.
the kid. He just said, "What's your name?" Like he made a point to bring up the everything with Jason Kelsey. Like there
Yeah.
is he was essentially trying to hold the kid accountable, right? For put a name to what you said, right? Like don't hide behind that. We see that a lot, right? Like people,
Yeah.
um, for better and for worse, not you know anonymous usernames, all that
And
stuff. Like
I think
people
the
have become comfortable with lobbing criticisms without consequence,
yes,
and
and that's
I
the
think
Jason Kelsey thing, right?
right,
It's
and but like Franklin essentially was saying the same thing, right? Like there's consequences to those actions. I wanted to say too, you mentioned how he answered every question. He answered everything earnestly to it.
Mhm.
He didn't it felt like nothing was out of bounds, so to speak, in that
Yeah.
press conference, right? Sometimes there are things that we ask James that he kind of doesn't want to answer and he answers it his own way, right? Like he kind of answers something else essentially. That was not the case on Monday. I thought he digested every question and answered the specific question, occasionally going off on something else that was connected to it, but it all came back to the
There were
question
a
that was
lot of
being asked.
details. Yeah.
Yes, and I thought I thought
It
he
was
handled
helpful.
himself
Mhm.
really well. It was helpful for us, obviously, but I think it's important, like that accountability aspect, right? He was taking accountability for what happened on Saturday, which was a failure. I don't think he used that word, but I think like he behaved like that the team had failed on Saturday and that they were trying to fix it. And I think that is important and it's good. And if they're going to get over the hump, that he needs to do that, and he did do it. And yeah, I thought a lot of his answers were telling. Let's take a brief break from the podcast to discuss our good friends at Roback. Roback is one of my favorite apparel brands. The clothes I get from there, as you can tell, I
Got
wear
it
all
on
the
right now.
time. Yeah, I've got the hoodie on, a performance hoodie on. I've got a hat on. I actually have joggers on as well that are Roback joggers. I will be golfing on Friday wearing a Roback performance polo and Roback performance joggers because it's going to be a little bit chilly out. Honestly, we'll probably have the hoodie on too because it's going to be a little cold out, even though it'll be sunny. It's some of the best gear that I own. I wear it all the time. And if you want some of that, you can use code TND20 for 20% off your first order over at roback.com. That's TND as in the Nittany Dispatch 20. But yeah, Audrey, it's as good as it gets.
I think we're gonna have to call that the Roback trifecta, John, when you wear the pants, the hoodie, and the hat. You could
It'll
also
be
add a
it'll be
vest, and
four.
then it'll be all
It'll be
four.
it'll be four because it'll be the joggers, it'll be a polo, it'll be a
Oh, I forgot
hoodie,
about the
and it'll
polo.
be a hat. And
Right.
so listen, it's fully decked out in Roback gear. No shame. It is comfortable. Because here's the thing. I wear Roback hoodies in the summer when I golf because they're breathable and I don't feel like I'm sweating too much when I golf. And they're not like tight against my arms when I swing. And I wear it in the winter because I feel like it still keeps me warm too, right? Like it
So
is
it's not impacting your performance.
no, it's the most versatile piece of apparel that I own. And you can get 20% off your first order of that same apparel over at roback.com with code TND20. Now, back to the show. To go to that goal line stand. So I know I said post game, I think I said on here that the play calling I had issue with, right? I have issue with not getting the ball to Tyler Warren. Yes, 100%. On an individual level, like if you just take each play separately and don't look at the fact
Mhm.
that they didn't get Tyler Warren the ball on these four downs, yes, one of these plays should have been replaced with Tyler Warren
At
taking
least one.
taking a snap from the gun or under center. Totally agree. It was really execution that got them
Mhm.
to not score there, right? That the first play, the offensive line and the left side of the offensive line and Tyler Warren like collapse down and create a lane. Katron Allen's really patient at first, but then plows ahead, right? Like when he stutter steps like that, you would expect him to find that easy cutback lane that's right there against Davison Igbenison, that he's got a one-on-one with an Ohio State corner who is not stronger than he is, where he should score a touchdown there. But instead, Allen puts his head down and tries to score there, right? The second play, I think it was Cody Simon from Ohio State, makes a really good play, is really patient, tackles Allen, and they end up not scoring there. Tyler Warren misses a block that probably would have led to a touchdown. And the third one, Nick Dawkins gets blown off the ball to snap. The play never has a chance. Like immediately in the backfield, if he makes that block, they have an alley there, right? Like and I know nobody wants to hear this. And yes, I
was gonna say,
cannot
you're
say
rubbing
this
salt
enough.
in the wound, John.
I know, but I think it's important to like look at these
Mhm.
things on an
Right.
individual basis. If we're going to be critical of Andy Kotelnicki, then we should fully vet the decisions and how it played out and why it went wrong, right? And I think that third down play is probably the one that should be the Tyler Warren touch, either the second or the third down. I'm fine with the first down one because again, like they got a one-on-one if
Yeah.
Katron Allen takes
If
it
you
and he
hit it,
doesn't.
yep.
The fourth down play, I cannot believe that Drew Allar fit that ball into that window. It is not there. Like that pass is not there.
It is
But
not there at all.
he threads the needle perfectly, especially when you look at I think I've said on here before I watched all 22. If you look at the view from behind the quarterback, he has no business getting that throw in there. And Khalil Dinkins doesn't or can't get his hands up because he's being held a little bit, but like can't get his hands up, doesn't get his hands up, whatever you want to call it. Like the throw is there. It's catchable. Yes, it's coming in fast, but he's got to get his hands up on that ball. And like you can see the rub route doesn't work. Tyler Warren's probably getting tackled short of the goal line based on the positioning of the player behind him. It's probably an ankle tackle that gets him brought down there. And it's an immediate tackle too. So I don't necessarily fault, and actually I don't fault Allar at all for not making that throw. But I went back. The reason I say all this is because I went back and looked at these one by one, and I don't see a ton of fault in any of the individual decisions for each individual play call. It's when you look at it as a whole, and
Except
you have a
not
set
getting
of
your
downs.
best player the ball.
But I'm saying even then, like even if you look at like all four of these individually, like they're fine. But it's the fact that in the four as a total, you didn't get Tyler Warren the
Right.
ball on any of those plays. And so I don't think the fourth one can count because you're throwing it to him. I
Yeah.
think they should have gone either under center with him or gone to the gun,
Yep.
probably on second down and try, because once you don't get the Katron touchdown on the first one, you also, if you're going to run Allen again, you probably want to give him a breather, right? Like you don't want to immediately go back to him. So you get Tyler Warren the ball in that situation, you probably end up scoring. But yeah, it really took, the way I wrote this in my Good Bad Ugly column, which you can read on CenterDaily.com, is that it took so much for them not to score. Like it took so many things going wrong, and they did, right? Like it's unlucky. It's not what people want to hear. They want blame to be cast on someone. I totally understand that. Again, Eagles fan, I really get it. But like you want to find the blame, and the blame pie like goes to different places on each play, right? And Kotelnicki's wrong for not getting Tyler Warren the ball at all in that series, and Khalil Dinkins is wrong for Dinkins is wrong for not getting his hands on that throw, and Nick Dawkins is wrong for getting blown up. Katron Allen's wrong for not getting to the taking the one-on-one matchup that he has on the cutback there. Tyler Warren's wrong for missing the block on second down. Like everyone had a part in that and why it all went wrong, and ultimately, like, yes, the coordinator has to take most of the blame because he has an opportunity to get the best player of the ball in that situation, but I couldn't help but think every time I watched each of the plays, like they should have scored. Like it doesn't almost connect or compute right to me that on each of those four individual plays, like that they went 0 for 1 each time. Like them going 0 for 4 after rewatching it is like pretty astounding, pretty surprising. And again, like James said, indicative. If you can't get a yard, then that's on you.
And the thing that I go back to is you're splitting the blame around. The thing that I asked James Franklin, and again, we ask questions because we want to know, because we're curious, right? And he said, it's
And because fans
hindsight.
have questions, by the way, like our fans are our
Yeah, like
readers, and like those are the people, like we are the
we
conduit.
them. That's the thing, right? And so the thing that I asked him was in that goal line sequence, was there any time, any communication on the headset with Andy, any basically like you could have taken a timeout, right? Like that's the other part of it. Now you want to preserve your timeouts because you're hoping that your defense gets a stop or maybe
I
gets a
don't think you
safety,
can take a
whatever.
timeout there.
The timeout piece, I think I just bring it up. I'm not one way or the other on the timeout, but I wanted to bring it up to say, okay, the headset, James, you're the head coach, right? He was in lockstep from what he said with what Andy was calling because he didn't want to get in the way, right? And as a former play caller, he knows this better than anybody. You're in the flow of the game. He said the worst thing you can do is try and second guess the calls that your coordinator's sending in, right? So again, you get these calls, you have the opportunity. He could have said, "Hey Andy, let's get at the Warren" or whatever. He could have overrode it, but he didn't because you don't want to second guess your coordinator. And so I thought that was an interesting point because there were a lot of questions about it. And again, this is one of those sequences that is going to go a long way in shaping and defining the season, is going to go a long way in shaping and defining this history of Penn State, Ohio State, and the past decade and what it's looked like. So I just thought it was important that we got those details hammered down. He was also asked about
Well,
the
real quick
defense.
on
Mhm.
that point, if you remember, I asked James a few weeks ago the process in those situations, kind of setting up for one of these things to happen, and
I forgot about that.
to kind of prove that this is not like BS from him.
Mhm.
The answer was pretty much the same, right? Like they make those decisions, those processes are laid out in during the week, right? Like those
Yep.
decision making processes are laid out during the week, and he is not interfering in those kind of situations. And I thought, like, again, he's clearly telling the truth, right? Like, but what I think has been funny is seeing some of the reaction in the past. We've seen, James is meddling, he's making play calls or what have you, and then suddenly James says he's not interfering, and it's like, well, you're the head coach, you need to interfere.
Why
Like,
didn't you step in?
yeah,
You
right.
can't
Like
win.
you can't win,
The guy
right?
can't
Like
win. Yeah.
if it doesn't go well, you're going to be criticized no matter what. And I think he is kind of acknowledged and accepted that point. And I think that's good and that's healthy for him because no matter what he does, if they lose, he's going to get the blame, and he took accountability for that too.
And the thing that he mentioned post game Saturday, he doubled back to on Monday, which was he had told us he planned what he meant to say to us post game. Like he had at some point during the week had kind of hit his talking points of we're going to win this game and here's what I'm going to say to the media, right? And I wrote on the Athletic that I thought what he meant, and I wrote this Monday before he talked about it, was that he was going to come in the room and say, "Hey, we arrived. We're a national championship team. It's been a really long ride. It's been a lot of scratching and clawing and making up differences here and there to chase these elite programs. It's a year-round race." He'd thank, the chairman of the board and Pat Kraft and the resources and the fans and the collective and all these things. And then he said, but now's not the time for that. I'm going to save it for an appropriate time. And I think that speaks to just how much he also thought this was a moment and that they were ready for that moment and he was prepped for that moment. And instead, we never heard that, right? We're never going to hear that.
I don't know
Maybe
if we're
later
never
on
going to
this
hear it.
year, I say maybe later on this year, if they win a playoff game or something like that, maybe we hear it. But I thought that was an interesting note. But to go back to the point I was making earlier about the defense, he labeled that following drive, right? So you get the goal line, you don't score, they're hoping they get a safety, defense comes on the field. And James Franklin referred to that as concerning, right? He said it was concerning to see the way when Will Howard comes out, quarterback sneak gets 4 yards. Like the defense at that point was totally deflated. You could see it. It was even more, it was obvious watching it live. It was even more when I went back and watched it on Sunday. Um, so I thought again he addressed that head on of this is not what you want to see from your defense in that moment. And so again, I thought that was one of the most like forthcoming, interesting press conferences
That was the most
since he's been
enlightening he's
here.
been. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think I like credit to him. And that's he
He
had.
could have easily won a notice and said, "Hey, we've moved
Yes.
on to Washington. We flushed it." And like again, like these are the things that he understands that people want answers. Fans want answers, right? Like this was a big moment. Um and obviously the emotion of that was still there Saturday after the game, right? You're never going to just kind of a little bit inside baseball for fans post game, like you're going to get some answers, but I think people have to also understand like the coach just came off the field. He just came out of
Yes.
the locker room. Like the emotion is raw. These guys spend all week, their entire life, right? All of this prepped into this game, this moment. Like there's the human element to it of like you're not going to get a great answer most likely post game for
Well,
something.
that's why you ask more about the emotion of it than the X's and O's
Mhm.
of it, right? In that setting, because that's what
Because you ask
they're
X's and O's, and they're going to say, "Well, we don't know. We have to go back and watch the film," right? Which is
right.
fair. Like that's but you
Yes,
want to get
they're
the
willing to
best,
be
most informed answer.
they're being willing to be introspective about the emotion of what they're feeling and when they felt it and all that stuff. But yeah, I think we can now move on to the Penn State's next opponent here with
Can we
Washington.
flush it? Can we flush the last
Yeah,
game?
we will flush it and move on to Penn State's whiteout game against Washington, which is now a night game, as we found out during the last episode, which was a lot of fun to find out.
And John, where
Um,
is this game going to be available on, I guess is how you're
It
phrasing
will
it.
be on Peacock or in a local IMAX theater if you decide
But we don't
to
have one of those in State College.
right, and so we don't have to really worry about that. But from a actual game itself standpoint, Penn State should win this game. Like this should look not too dissimilar from Illinois or West Virginia. Like take your pick of some of those good but not great teams that they played earlier this year. I think Washington's better than their record. But that being said, I don't think they're a top 25 team or anything like that. They just beat USC, but at this point, who hasn't? Will Rogers is a good but not great quarterback who excelled in the air raid when he was with Mississippi State. They have Giles Jackson at wide receiver. They have Denzel Boston at wide receiver, both two good receivers. I don't think either of them is necessarily, the Roma Dunes or Jalen McMillan or Jalen Polk that they had last year. Two good wideouts, though. I just don't think they reached that threshold. Jonah Coleman is a small but big back that fans should watch out for. But
He's
like at the end of the day, you look at the guys at skill positions, Penn State's better defensively at pretty much all the spots that will match up there. You look at Penn State's offense, they should be able to do damage against this Washington defense. We don't have to go too in depth about this game itself because frankly it's still it's weird that it's still not the news, right? Like it's the news is still Ohio State and the playoff and everything like that. But I think my expectations going into this weekend are that Penn State, James talks about, we ask about like the turning one loss into two kind of thing.
Snowball theory, as I call it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this should not be a massive concern for fans this weekend. I think Penn State should take control of this game early and kind of welcome Washington to the Big Ten in an unwelcoming way.
Well, I want to go back to the whiteout and IMAX and all of that because this feels so weird. And this was my thought process back in the summer when we were debating what game should be the whiteout. And I was like, okay, Ohio State's probably going to be at noon. It's going to be weird, but do it at noon, whatever. Because of what was just happened, right? Like you just had this gut punch from Ohio State. Your moment was last week. And again, this isn't Penn State's fault, right? This is where we're at with television contracts. Big Noon gets the game. I get it. You don't want your visual spectacle of the whiteout at a noon game. So you make it a helmet stripe, not to be confused with the stripe out, not to be confused with whiteout energy, which was the Illinois game. I'm struggling with the game themes right now. To me, I'm like, they're all kind of blurring together, but this is the whiteout. Again, but it doesn't have the emotional magnitude of last weekend where the town was bursting at its seams and just because of the opponent and all of that. A story that I'm working on this week that'll be up Friday on The Athletic is how we got here, right? How did we get here? That Penn State showcase, this college football showcase moment of the whiteout is on Peacock. It's kind of crazy to think of like, this is where we're at, right? Your marquee game against Ohio State is a noon kick, which the ratings came in Wednesday. We're recording this. It was like 9.4 million.
994.
Yeah, so 994.
Almost 10.
So again, like for all the consternation about Big Noon, and I get it, and how much it sucks when you're in the stadium for some folks and you want to tailgate all day. People are watching and they're watching in droves, right? And because it's this exposure machine. But the IMAX piece to this is really interesting too, because I'm talking to folks this week about how this came about, right? We saw that NBC, which is of course Peacock, NBC did this with the Olympic opening ceremonies. They had it where you could go to IMAX theaters and watch opening ceremonies. This is the first college football game that's going to be shown live in IMAX. So if ever you're at a trivia night somewhere along the lines and this becomes a question, this is the correct answer. Penn State, Washington, first ever college football game being shown live in IMAX. There are 23 different theaters. They're mostly spread out between Pennsylvania, the state of Washington. There are some in Maryland, some in New York, Jersey, whatever. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have an IMAX theater here in State College because our runways are small and it is what it is, right? But so if you want, you can watch it. It looks like, it'll be in my story, but like it looks like, your regular kind of movie pricing. I am really curious if you're listening and you're planning on going, please don't be afraid to share what it was like. I'm really curious
Yes.
what this experience is like for fans because
Either email both of us or leave it in the comments of this
Mhm.
podcast. Like that, I'm
I
fascinated
wanna
by
know.
this too. Yeah,
Because the whole like I always am thinking like what's the next frontier for fandom, right? And for sports watching. And I think I mentioned on here before, John, when we were in LA and there was that what's it called? Not the
I
sphere,
know
but
what you're
the
talking about. Where it was Texas, Michigan. I
Plex or
think they had.
something. The
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. But
Where
there's
it
a like
feels
a
like or looks like you're in the front row or on the
yeah,
sideline
it's
watching
this
a game.
immersive thing, but it was much more expensive. Where this is like your, your regular like going to an IMAX movie pricing, right? And we've seen it. Taylor Swift, the Eras tour, right? You go to the IMAX theaters. One of us on this podcast did that and really enjoyed herself. The other one was John, and he didn't. Um,
I have never been to an IMAX for what it's worth.
it was last year when Penn State was at Ohio State.
Yeah,
I went
no, yeah, I
to
remember what it was.
the theater in Columbus. It was
But I'm saying,
very, very
like,
good
in
day.
general, I have never been to an
Really?
IMAX theater. I don't yeah. I mean, I like
Because we
movies a
don't
lot.
have
I
them
just
around here. Yeah.
right,
No,
that's the thing, like
they are really awesome, and I think it's a cool experience, right? And you can get your alcohol, right? And you can kind of sit there. I'm wondering, like, what's the fan turnout going to be like? Or do people say it's 8 o'clock at night? We just want to stay in our homes and watch it. I don't know because
yeah.
thinking of it as like a sports fan, would I go to watch the Packers in IMAX?
I don't like being in public to watch the Eagles.
Right,
Like,
I get
I don't
that,
really care
I'm
where it
very
is.
much like that too,
Yeah.
but the immersive experience, like, I would kind of wanna try it
I
once, right? Like, if
I'm on
the
the opposite
conditions are
side.
right. But so, yeah, so if long story short, if you go this weekend to this historic event, the first ever college football game live on IMAX, please let us know how it is. Genuinely curious to know. Again, this could be the next frontier, and Penn State fans should know how to get Peacock at this point, and if you don't,
Yes.
it's not going anywhere. They were on Peacock last year against Delaware.
And if you
This is
like
where we're
college
at.
basketball, there's gonna be a lot of college basketball games on Peacock, whether it's Penn State or other Big Ten teams. Like, it's just this, like, as Audrey just said, this is where we're at, with all of this stuff.
Mhm.
But I think we can probably get into our predictions for this game. I know we haven't dug into Washington as much as we usually do, but
We had a lot to flush.
yeah, this is what happens when there's the first rankings come out and they're coming off this game against Ohio
Mhm.
State. I will defer to you on this and then get upset when you inevitably have the same score that I do. Uh, what is your predicted final score for this one?
I'm predicting Penn State wins 30-20.
Okay.
No reaction? Okay. I don't know what's the spread. Do you know?
Spread is opened at 13 and a half. The over under was
Okay.
45 and a half. So you have the over in Washington covering.
Okay, interesting. Because I did not know that when I made my pick, but yeah, I mean, I think we're all curious to see how does Penn State respond, right? What is the response after this game? Again, based off the players we talked to this week, seems like they've moved on. You'd hope they'd moved on. We can say what we want about the whiteout being this late in the year, being on Peacock, whatever. The crowd's still going to be really good. It's going to be amped, and like I know Penn State doesn't take that for granted. I think that's again as emotional as the past week was, you're still gonna get what over 100,000 people there, right? Like probably
It's
that
gonna
would
be
be my
loud. It's
guess.
gonna be packed. Like it's gonna be.
It's
I
gonna be
think it's gonna
loud. You
mostly
can
be like a whiteout, like what
yeah,
we
you
would
can
expect.
tailgate all day. It's the official whiteout, not to be confused with the stripe out, the helmet stripe, whiteout energy, all that. Um, and I just think that this is a team that we're gonna kind of learn a little bit more of the mental makeup, right? And how do you respond? What gets going? The receiving core is on the spot. Let's not dance around it, right? I think after last week, it was abundantly clear that it's still an
It's
issue,
not good
right?
enough. It's just not good enough.
It's not good enough, right? And you can mask these issues with Tyler Warren. You can get past it against lesser competition. But James Franklin even hit on it Wednesday after practice. He said, "Yeah, like they're waiting for the game for kind of more than one guy to put it together, right? Like we saw Liam Clifford had a big game. We saw Julian Fleming with the key fourth down catches at USC. We saw Trey Wallace and Amari Evans in the opener, but we haven't really seen any of it together. And so
Yeah.
you're hoping that that's kind of what happens. So my player that we'll be talking about on Sunday. I'm gonna go with Trey Wallace just because somebody in that receiving core has to step up. I do want to mention Caden Saunders was back at practice Wednesday night for what it's worth. We'll see.
He
James
did.
Franklin, good.
He did not look like he was moving at 100% to me.
Honestly, I wasn't paying too close attention to him. I was kind of looking at the other end of the field, but
we're in there for 15 minutes. Like, I don't know. Like, I could be totally wrong, to be clear.
yeah,
But, like,
and the other one,
I thought he was moving a little slower than I would
yeah,
anticipate.
denied Dennis Sutton. James Franklin said he felt better this past Sunday than he did the previous Sunday. So that's something else to kind of keep an eye on the injury health standpoint, how many snaps he plays if he's back to full strength. But yeah, 30 to
Keon
20.
Wiley back at practice. Potential linebacker help coming at some point.
Yeah, honestly, I'd forgotten about Keon Wiley just because we haven't seen him in so long.
Would be important, I think. But yeah, as
would
you said,
be big if true.
30 to 20 for you with Trey Wallace. I have Penn State winning 31-14, covering in the under. I just checked the over/under. Some places it's 45.5, some places 46.5. The spread is still 13.5. And if you would like me to name that sports book, then we'll take some advertising dollars. No free advertising here on this podcast. But no, this is a.
Don't I do enough free beer advertising on here?
Right, that's what I mean.
Like, even sometimes drink non-alcoholic stuff tonight.
We're already giving enough away. But yeah, I've got 31-14. I just think Penn State is better than Washington. I think they come out, take a hold of this game early, go up 2 scores, and never really look back, right? And Penn State is able to kind of coast from there, use the energy of the whiteout, use Washington dealing with the whiteout to their advantage. Like I said, covering that spread. I have us talking about Tyler Warren on Sunday because I think it reignites the Heisman campaign on some level. But I also think like these wide receivers just aren't good enough right now. And I don't think this game is going to change that. And I think they are kind of a few games away from that mattering, because the next time that I think the wideouts can play well and me kind of care because it's against a good enough opponent is the first round of the playoff. So it's like, it's one of those things where even, sure, they put it all together, but it's Purdue. Who cares? Sure, they put it all together. It's Maryland. Who cares? Maybe Minnesota, because that defense is legitimately really good. But yeah,
I think the game, John.
If they lose another one, it'll be it. By the way, if they lose another one, I think they're still making a playoff. They're just not hosting a game anymore, because everyone is looking at like, well, team 10, 11, and 12 can jump them. Teams 10, 11, and 12 are probably playing teams like 1 through 15 at some point and losing. Like, somebody's got to lose those matchups. Penn State's biggest advantage is they don't play any of those teams the rest of the way. They don't have any ranked opponents the rest of the way, and they aren't going to get knocked down by if they lose to Minnesota, they're still probably fine, is my point.
This is what I wanted to pull up from my story. So currently Penn State, per our model at The Athletic, which is run by Austin Mock, he's got this statistical model and he runs all the numbers for me, because you can't let me try and input numbers. I'll break the whole thing. At the moment, as we talk here, Penn State has an 85% chance to make the playoff field, right? 43% likelihood that they will host a playoff game.
I think both those numbers are low.
If they go 10-2, you know what that shot is, John?
What's that?
Actually increases to 92%, right? So 10-2 with a loss to Minnesota. I had him run it with both. 10-2 loss to Minnesota, 10-2 loss to Washington. His model has 92% chance. The problem is when you get the 9-3, then it dips to 12%.
Right, and that's the thing. Like,
I'm sorry, 2% chance to make the playoff at 9-3. So that to me is like, you've got to win. Obviously, you want to win all 4 of them, but if you go 3-1, you're fine. If you go 2-2, you're gonna have problems.
I think at some point a 3-loss team will make the playoff, but it's going to be a team with a resume like Ole Miss, where they play a bunch of good teams. In fact, I think it could be Ole Miss this year, by the way. But I think at some point a 9-3 team will make the 12-team field. But Penn State's schedule is not conducive to that right now. Yeah, I think that is an excellent point. Like,
they did. I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention this real quick, because you said the schedule isn't conducive to that. One of the things the committee highlighted was that Penn State had you open on the road at West Virginia, and they recognized that that's a tough place to play. I just want to put that out there.
I just don't care. Like, that West Virginia team is not good enough for them to count it that way. More power to them if they do, but that's not how I would do it, I guess. But yeah, no, I think that's worth bringing up, because it is how they view it, and how they view it matters infinitely more than how I view it, because I don't have a say in the matter, right? Like,
John, we're gonna stump to get you on the committee. That's gonna be our thing.
Listen, I think the committee.
Actually, no, because then I'll need a new co-host. So scratch that.
No. We'll still do the podcast. In fact, we'll do it live from the committee meetings.
We'll live stream, yeah.
Yes, but I think that's a good place to leave it for this week. We've both gone on the record with our predictions. Things are, I think, for Penn State fans looking up, right? After the downturn Saturday and maybe some of the doom and gloom that I don't want to say took part in, but like we understood right after that game and discussed it and broke it down.
Listen,
And everything.
I don't
I think
enjoy writing the same story 8 years
no,
in a row.
it's
Like,
not fun.
I mean, I get it. Like, I understand the emotion of it.
Yes.
And I think, like, you all, like, as sports fans, y'all know those moments of a season and how big and how important they are. And that's what this past week was. And so it's about how do you regroup, right? Like, at the end of the day, and this is where I just want to reiterate this because I've seen a lot of, hey, well, can they actually beat anybody good? And I even wrote that on The Athletic of, hey, if they get in, can they actually win a game? I don't know, but enjoy the process of getting there, right?
I
Being a
also think
fan should be fun.
they
I mean,
can
it's going to be
clearly
agonizing, but it should be fun.
they can clearly beat good teams. It's the best of the best that they struggle with, right? We
Mhm.
know this. Like,
Yeah.
and I think they can win a playoff game. That being said, I get it. If the Eagles lose to the Cowboys and Cooper Rush, I will act like a big baby all next week. So I understand. I don't
That's
blame
fair.
you for being miserable if you
Packers
want to be
can't hurt me
miserable.
this week.
Yeah, well, they'll try. But that'll do it for this week's episode of the Nittany Dispatch. If you want to read Audrey's writing, you can find it over at The Athletic. You can find my writing at centerdaily.com. You can find me on Twitter at John Sauber. You can find Audrey at OddSnyder4. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Those 5-star ratings really help us out. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube right now. Hit the thumbs up button down below. Hit the subscribe button down below. We really appreciate it. We will be back very early Sunday morning, if I had to guess, to discuss Penn State's game against Washington. But until next time, thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.